Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Matcha and Murder. If you're new here, hi, my name is Shay, and I'm your host. Now, before we jump in, I just want to quickly add a disclaimer. This episode is for educational purposes, and everything that I talk about is publicly available information that I've researched and compiled together. I always aim to discuss true crime cases with respect for the victims, the families, and everyone impacted. I also want to give a quick content warning. This episode will discuss topics such as murder, violence, and disturbing behavior. So if that's something that you may find triggering, please feel free to skip this episode or listen with caution. And with that being said, you guys, go ahead and grab your matcha because this case is about to get dark. Today, we are going to be talking about Dennis Rader, better known as BTK, which stands for bind, torture, kill. And yes, he gave himself that nickname, which makes this case even creepier. What really messes with me about this case is just how normal Dennis Rader appeared. He had a complete double life. He was a husband, a father, even an active member in his church, but he was a complete monster. Yet, the type of person that you wouldn't even think twice about. Between the 1970s and the early 2000s, Rader terrorized Wichita, Kansas, not just through his crimes, but through letters, poems, and taunts that he sent to the police and media. He didn't just want to kill. He wanted recognition. He wanted to be remembered. And what makes it even more disturbing is that he managed to hide in plain sight. So you might be asking yourself, how does someone live that kind of double life for decades without being caught? To answer that, we have to go back to the beginning, long before BTK became a name that terrified Wichita. Dennis Rader was born on March 9, 1945 in Pittsburgh, Kansas, but he grew up in Wichita. He was the oldest of 4 children to Dorothea and William Rader, and the family was active in the Zion Lutheran Church. By most accounts, his childhood appeared fairly normal. There were no obvious signs of trauma or abuse, but both of his parents worked long hours, which meant Rader and his brothers often went without much attention. And while everything on the surface seemed ordinary, there were troubling signs very early on. Even as a child, Rader showed a disturbing, sadistic fascination with harming animals, behavior that he later admitted was tied to feelings of sexual arousal. And looking back now, those weren't just disturbing childhood moments. Animal cruelty is often pointed to as an early warning sign in the development of serial killers. And for Rader, it was a sign of what was still yet to come. Rader would later recall one particular moment that stuck with him, and that was when his mother's ring became caught on a couch spring and she panicked, calling out for help. But instead of feeling fear or urgency for her, Rader experienced something deeply disturbing. He felt sexually aroused by the excitement of seeing a woman helpless, trapped, and terrified. And Rader even later recalled that this moment was a defining moment that sparked his desires to bind, torture, and kill. And while Rader was in middle school, he actually became a peeping Tom. One of his teachers had humiliated him in front of his class, so after school he snuck over to his teacher's house and watched her through her bedroom window. As he watched her, he tied a rope around his neck and began to pleasure himself. Rader later described this as a pivotal moment for him, marking the point where his fantasies began shifting into behaviors that would later define his crimes. In high school, Rader mostly faded into the background. He didn't play sports, he wasn't involved in any extracurriculars, and he tended to keep to himself. He graduated in 1963 and briefly attended Kansas Wesleyan University, but it didn't last long. He struggled academically and eventually dropped out after earning poor grades. And after dropping out of college, Rader enlisted in the United States Air Force in June of 1966. He completed his basic training in Texas and was then stationed in Mobile, Alabama, where he worked as an antenna installer and maintenance specialist. Over the course of his service, he was also stationed in Turkey, Greece, South Korea, and Japan, before eventually being honorably discharged. After leaving the Air Force, Rader spent the following years bouncing between a handful of jobs. Around the same time, Rader threw himself back into church life, and that's where he met a woman named Paula Dietz. They married the following year in 1971 and eventually had 2 children, son Brian and a daughter Carrie. Rader also pursued his education, earning an associate's degree in electronics engineering from Butler County Community College in 1973, and later a Bachelor of Science in Administration of Justice from Wichita State University in 1979. To everyone around him, Rader seemed like a nice, ordinary guy. He was a devoted husband, a father, and he was even a Cub Scout leader to his son's troop. No one suspected what he was doing, the evil that he was hiding, right under their noses. And while Rader was building what looked like this picture-perfect life on the outside, something much darker was already starting to grow underneath the surface. Long before anyone suspected him, and long before his family had any idea, he already started acting on the violent fantasies that would eventually lead to his first victims. Rader later told his daughter, Carrie, that just a few months before these murders, he had actually been working at Cessna, and he actually really enjoyed that job. But in the fall of 1973, he was laid off, and that seemed to hit him hard. Carrie later said that her father told her that he became really depressed and really bored. She recalled him saying, "Idle hands make for the devil's work," and according to him, that was the period where he started thinking more and more about violent and disturbing things. And eventually, he stopped just thinking about them and started putting them into action. The Otero family had only recently moved to Wichita when tragedy struck. Joseph and Julie, along with their 5 children, Charlie, Danny, Carmen, Josephine, and Joseph Jr., had relocated in the fall of 1973. Just a few months before the murders. Joseph, a former Air Force serviceman, had been stationed in several places, and Wichita offered new job opportunities in the aviation industry, which was really booming at the time. Friends and neighbors described them as a normal, loving family. Joseph Otero worked to support his family, while his wife Julie was focused on their home and their children. But their time in Wichita would be heartbreakingly short, cut off before they had a chance to fully put down roots. Years later, Rader would claim that he first noticed the family months earlier, after seeing Julie and Josephine walking around town. From that moment on, he began watching them, tracking their routines, noting when they were home and when they weren't, and then on the morning of January 15th, 1974, all of that quiet observation turned deadly. No one in the Otero family could have imagined the horror that awaited them. Joseph and Julie were at home with their 2 youngest children, 9-year-old Joseph Jr., who went by Joey, and 11-year-old Josephine, or Josie, while their 3 older kids had already left for school. Rader parked nearby, jumped a fence, and cut the phone lines before making his way toward the house. He later said that he hesitated briefly, trying to decide whether to go through with his plan. But before he could make up his mind, young Joey opened the back door to let the family dog out. And in that moment, Rader forced his way inside, carrying what he later called his hit kit, a collection of weapons and bindings. He was caught off guard to find that Mr. Otero was at home, because from his surveillance, he believed only Julie, Joey, and Josie would be there. Joseph Sr. was not supposed to be a part of the picture. Rader then told the family that he was wanted in California and that he only needed some supplies, like food, money, and a car, and then he would be on his way. It was a trick that he would use on most of his victims, a way to get them to cooperate and make it easier to tie them up without immediately raising suspicion or resistance. He led the family to believe that he was going to let them go. He ordered the family to lie down on the living room floor, but he realized that wasn't a good idea, and he then ordered the family by gunpoint to the bedroom, where he bound Julie to the bed. Joseph, Josie, and Joey were all bound while lying on the floor. The family started to complain about the bindings, so Rader loosened the bonds several times, and Joseph had actually been suffering from a broken rib which he got from a car accident. And when he mentioned this, Rader put a pillow under his head, trying to make him comfortable. Bargaining for their lives, Joseph and Julie offered Rader their car keys and all the cash that they had on them at the time. Now, Rader later mentioned that during this moment, he realized he didn't have a mask on and that the family could easily identify him. And it was after this that Rader decided he was going to kill them. He put a plastic bag over Mr. Otero's head and secured it with cords so that it was tight. but Mr. Otero actually ended up tearing a hole through the bag. So Rader then replaced the bag with another, causing him to slowly suffocate. He then strangled Julie with a rope until she was unconscious. He then turned his attention to Josie and strangled her unconscious as well. Thinking both of them were dead, he then proceeded to place a plastic bag over 9-year-old Joey's head. At that moment, Julie regained consciousness and began pleading with him for the mercy of her son. Rader agreed to spare Joey's life and took the bag off his head. He then took Joey into another room where he then placed a bag, a t-shirt, and another bag over Joey's head, suffocating him until he died. Rader then came back to the bedroom and strangled Julie again, this time killing her. At this time, Josie had regained consciousness and Rader took her down to the basement and removed her clothing. When she asked what was going to happen to her, he chillingly replied, "Well, honey, you're going to be in heaven with the rest of your family." He then hung her from a pipe, and while she asphyxiated, he began to pleasure himself, which resulted in him leaving behind his DNA evidence. Afterwards, he tried to clean the crime scene up a little bit before leaving, and later that day, the 3 older Otero children came home from school and stumbled onto a horrific scene. Their parents had been killed. They ran straight to the neighbors, urging them to call the police. Thankfully, the kids did not discover the bodies of their younger siblings themselves. A first responder actually found them and had to break the devastating news that Joey and Josephine had also died. The house was immediately treated as a crime scene, with investigators documenting evidence, photographing every detail, and collecting anything that might lead to a suspect. But in 1974, DNA analysis wasn't yet a tool available to law enforcement, forcing detectives to rely on limited forensic techniques, such as eyewitness accounts and circumstantial clues. And as the news spread, fear took hold with the neighbors and the community, fueled by the brutal and seemingly random nature of the murders. And that fear only deepened as investigators began to suspect that the Otero family murders were not an isolated incident, but the work of a serial killer. Not long after, their worst fears were confirmed. Driven by ego, compulsion, and a need for control, Dennis Rader inserted himself into the investigation. He reached out to police and media, very similarly like the Zodiac killer who came before him, desperate to be feared, admired, and untouchable. He anonymously contacted the Wichita Eagle, directing staff to a technical engineering textbook in a local library. Inside was a letter claiming responsibility for the Otero family murders, promising more to come, and chillingly stating, "When this monster entered my brain, I will never know, but it is here to stay." The letter contained details only law enforcement would know, leaving no doubt about its authenticity. It marked the beginning of a long and taunting correspondence, and for the first time, Rader signed his name BTK, an acronym for how he killed his victims, by binding them, torturing them, and killing them. And just a few months after the Otero murders, Dennis Rader was back out looking for his next victim. He would stalk a few potential targets before planning his attack. Rader had decided that his next victim would be 21-year-old Catherine Bright, who he selected after he saw entering her home with a friend. Rader referred to her as Project Lights Out. He would refer to a lot of his murders as projects. On April 4th, 1974, Dennis Rader broke into Catherine's home by breaking the back sliding glass door after cutting her phone lines. He noticed that she was not home, so he began sweeping up the glass to reduce suspicion for when Catherine returned, and he waited for her. And when she did return home, Dennis was once again shocked to see that she was not alone. She was accompanied by her 19-year-old brother, Kevin Bright. And while holding them at gunpoint, Rader used the same story that he told the Oteros, that he was wanted in California and all he needed was money and a car. Dennis Rader then ordered Kevin to tie up his sister before he brought Kevin into a separate room, where he tied Kevin to a bedpost. After tying up Catherine, Rader then returned to the bedroom that Kevin was in to strangle him. But Kevin had actually freed himself, and a struggle began. Rader then pulled out his firearm and shot Kevin in the head. Believing Kevin was dead, Rader went back to Catherine, who also fought back. And it was during this struggle, Rader heard movement in the other room, and returned to find Kevin was still alive. Rader began struggling with him again, trying to strangle him, during which Rader shot Kevin again, just above his mouth. Rader then returned his attention back to Catherine, trying to strangle her, but she didn't make it easy for him. She fought back with all of her might, which frustrated Rader, and he ended up stabbing her repeatedly in the stomach. While this was happening, and despite being shot in the face twice, Kevin was still alive, and he ran from the house to get help. He was able to flag down neighbors who ended up calling the police. Rader then fled the house knowing Kevin had escaped, and with that, he knew he didn't have time to clean up the scene. When police arrived shortly after, Catherine was still alive. She was holding a phone but was unable to fully speak. And tragically, she later died during emergency surgery from her injuries. In this attack, Rader used household items as restraints for both Catherine and Kevin, including bandanas, later claiming he did so to distinguish the crime from the Otero murders. And many years later, during his televised court confession, he later said that if he brought his own supplies, Kevin would be dead today. And he said, "I'm not bragging on that. It's just a matter of fact." And that line alone tells you everything that you need to know about how he saw himself. Cocky, cold, and disturbingly proud of the control he believed that he had. During his crimes, Rader often took souvenirs from his female victims, underwear, driver's license, and other personal items. But even in the years he wasn't killing, he admitted to behavior that revealed just how twisted his private life actually was. In secret, he would dress in women's clothing, sometimes wearing wigs or masks, and he would bind himself with rope. He would set up a tripod to take photos of himself. And for Rader, this was tied to sexual fantasy, control, and humiliation. It was all part of the dark BTK world that he created in his own mind. It was another way he split his life in two: the outwardly normal man people trusted, and the hidden world where BTK existed. The fact that he could move between those two worlds so seamlessly is part of what made him so dangerous and so hard to catch for so long. Dennis Rader himself described his personality in terms that highlight this chilling duality. Outwardly, he was a quiet, ordinary family man, a church council president, a diligent compliance officer, a dedicated husband and father. But in private, he was the sadistic, controlling killer he called BTK. The man his family, neighbors, and church trusted so completely had just murdered 5 people. Then, after the Otero murders and the killing of Catherine Bright, BTK went silent for nearly 3 years, and no one knew if that silence meant the danger had passed or if he was just there, waiting. That question was answered on March 17, 1977, when Rader struck again, this time targeting 26-year-old Shirley Relford. She was a single mom of 3 very young children. What makes this especially disturbing is that Shirley wasn't his original target that day. Rader had planned to kill someone else, but when he broke into the home and found it empty, he got frustrated, so he decided to find a random victim instead. And while driving around for a little bit, he came across Shirley's 5-year-old son, Stephen, who was walking home after picking up soup for his sick mother. Rader approached him, claiming to be a detective, and asked if he could help identify people in a photo. He then showed Stephen a photo of his own wife and daughter. Rader then followed Stephen back to his home and knocked on the door, and told Shirley he was a private detective, and showed her the same photo he had showed her son, and that's when everything changed. He pulled a gun and forced himself inside. He then told Shirley that he had a problem with sexual fantasies and he was going to tie her up. He then tried to tie up her 3 children but struggled, so instead he forced them into the bathroom and barricaded the door with Shirley's help under threat. Rader then took Shirley into the back bedroom. She became sick and vomited before he tied her legs to the bedpost and placed a plastic bag over her head, and he then strangled her with a rope, while he again began pleasuring himself. As Shirley was being murdered, she was struggling and screaming, and her kids heard all of it. Later, Rader claimed that the kids were crying and banging on the door, and that the family phone rang, and Rader had remembered that they had mentioned that the neighbor was going to check on them. So he quickly grabbed his hit kit, and he fled the house before anyone else could arrive. And later that same year, on December 8, 1977, he cut the phone line of 25-year-old Nancy Fox and broke into her home and waited in the kitchen for her to arrive. Once she was home, Rader confronted her. He told her he had a sexual problem and that he was going to tie her up and have sex with her. She asked Rader if she could go to the bathroom, and he agreed, but he demanded her that when she come out, she was to be undressed. He then handcuffed her and laid her on the bed, where he bound her feet and strangled her with a belt. He then removed the belt and the handcuffs and replaced them with pantyhose, and he then proceeded to pleasure himself once again. After he finished, he went through the house, cleaned up, and took some of Nancy's personal items. And chillingly, the next day, he called the police himself from a payphone to report her death, and he told the police that they would find the body of Nancy Fox at her house. The police acted fast and actually traced this phone call to the payphone that Rader used. An officer was there within 2 minutes, but the BTK killer was already gone, and the phone was just left there hanging. On February 10, 1978, Rader sent another letter, this time to Wichita television station KAKE. In it, he once again took credit for the murders of the Otero family, along with Catherine Bright, Shirley Relfield, and Nancy Fox. But this letter made one thing painfully clear. He wanted notoriety. Rader demanded more media coverage, writing, "How many do I have to kill before I get a name in the paper or some national attention?" Up until this point, police had kept the truth from the people of Wichita. They knew a serial killer was on the loose, but they feared that revealing it would send the town into chaos. Eventually, though, they released a sketch of BTK and confirmed that he had already taken 7 lives. The announcement sent a wave of fear rippling through the community, and suddenly everyone felt unsafe in their own homes. Yet, even as the city trembled in fear, Rader's murders didn't stop. They continued, sporadically, each one following the same chilling pattern he used before. Proof that BTK was still out there, watching and waiting. And on April 27, 1979, Dennis Rader almost added another name to his list of victims. He had begun stalking 63-year-old Anna Williams and thought he knew her routine well enough to strike. Rader broke into her home while she was out, and when she didn't return at her usual time, he waited for hours inside the house, but she never showed up. Frustrated that his plan had fallen apart, he eventually left without harming her. And luckily for Anna, she actually stayed the night at her daughter's house that evening, something Rader had no way of knowing, which saved her from becoming BTK's next victim. Later, Rader admitted he became absolutely livid when she evaded him and even took some of her belongings before he left. And 2 months later, after he broke into her home, he mailed Anna a poem and some of the items he had stolen, taunting that he had been in her home. And this rightfully terrified Anna, so much so that she moved out of Wichita and left the entire state of Kansas altogether. Between this time and his next victim, Dennis Rader went on an 8-year hiatus from killing. He later said that family and work had kept him busy, and during this period, he was even elected president of his church council. Being a family man, he admitted, served as both a cover and a restriction. He sometimes had to delay attacks so they wouldn't interfere with church duties, work obligations, or family events. And Rader's next known victim was 53-year-old Maureen Hedge, who he labeled Project Cookie. And he actually knew her casually. She lived just a few houses down from him in the neighborhood, and he targeted her to see if he could murder a neighbor and get away with it. On the night of April 27, 1985, Rader attended a Cub Scouts camping outing, but he faked a headache, blaming the rainy, muddy weather so that he could slip away under the guise of driving home. Once free, he drove to a deserted spot, quickly changed out of his Cub Scouts uniform, and then headed into a bowling alley. There, he carefully constructed his alibi. He ordered a beer, swished it in around his mouth, and he even splashed some on his face and clothes to make it look like he had been drinking there for a while. Then, using a fake slurred voice, he called a taxi and had himself dropped off just a block from Maureen Hedges' home. Before breaking in, Rader cut the phone lines like he did at his previous murders and hid in a bedroom closet. Also similar to his previous murders, Maureen wasn't alone. She came home with her boyfriend, so he waited for several hours until her boyfriend left and Maureen went to bed. Confident that she was asleep, he crept out, flipped on the bedroom light, and startled her awake. She screamed, but he quickly jumped on the bed and strangled her with his bare hands until she was dead. He then proceeded to strip Maureen of her clothes, tied her up, and placed her on a blanket. But Rader's compulsion didn't stop there. He wanted souvenirs and photographs. He collected Maureen's car keys and a few other mementos, and he then dragged her to her car and placed her in the trunk. Then he drove her to his very church, Christ Lutheran Church, where he had a set of keys. He dragged her body inside and covered the windows with garbage bags to block out the light. There, he posed her body and took Polaroid photos. As daylight approached, he cleaned up, removed the bags, turned off the lights, returned her body to the trunk, and drove to a remote ditch just a few miles away where he dumped Maureen's body. And yet, all the while, Rader continued living a life that looked completely ordinary, showing up at work, attending church, raising his family, while the part of him capable of this violence remained hidden, unnoticed, and terrifyingly close to everyone around him. The following year, on September 16, 1986, Rader posed as a telephone repairman to gain access to 28-year-old Vicki Wagerly's home. Once inside, he bound her hands, and despite her brave struggle to break free, he overpowered her and strangled her with a nylon stocking, all while her 2-year-old son was present. Afterward, he rearranged her clothes and took 3 Polaroids of her body. Her husband later discovered her, and for a time, he even became a suspect before BTK was eventually linked to the crime. And 5 years later, on January 19, 1991, Rader claimed his last known victim, 62-year-old Dolores Davis. He broke into her home by smashing a window with a cinder block, which caused Dolores to come out of her bedroom, where he used his now signature ruse that he was on the run, needing food and a car. He then bound her and strangled her with pantyhose before leaving her body near a bridge outside of town. After this final murder, BTK went silent for many years, disappearing from public view while continuing to live his seemingly ordinary double life. After Dolores Davis's murder, Dennis Rader went on hiatus for roughly 14 years, a period during which he didn't kill and the case went cold. But in January of 2004, 30 years after the Otero family murders, Dennis Rader reemerged after more than a decade of silence, and the trigger was a news story which the Wichita Eagle ran. It was a piece reflecting on the BTK case, noting that after decades it was still unsolved. Rader later admitted that reading it left him bored. That boredom, combined with his craving for attention, is what prompted him to start sending letters and packages again to local outlets. On March 19, 2004, the Wichita Eagle received a chilling letter from someone calling himself Bill Thomas Kilman, which stood for BTK. Inside, he claimed responsibility for the 1986 murder of Vicki Wagerly and included photos of the crime scene along with a photocopy of her driver's license, which was stolen at the time of her death. Until that moment, investigators hadn't been able to definitively link Vicki to BTK. For Rader, it was a way to taunt the police, insert himself back into the investigation, and satisfy the compulsions of the dark world he'd created for himself. As Rader ramped up his correspondence, he revealed just enough about himself to intrigue investigators. He told them he was a former military man, obsessed with trains, meticulous in his habits, but he also threw in lies, like claiming he was born in 1939 and moved constantly as a kid, keeping the truth hidden behind layers of deception. Then, in December of 2004, another package showed up in Murdoch Park. This one contained Nancy Fox's stolen driver's license. Rader's obsession didn't stop with letters and poems. In January 2005, he tried leaving a cereal box in a pickup truck at a Home Depot. The owner tossed it, but Rader couldn't resist following up, and the box was eventually recovered from the trash. Surveillance footage caught a shadowy figure in a black Jeep Cherokee dropping it off. He also returned to his letters, this time asking, "Can I communicate with Floppy and not be traced to a computer? Be honest." And why he thought the police would be honest with him, I have no idea. I think he was just absolutely delusional. But the police answered cryptically through a classified ad in the paper, "Rex, it will be okay." And on February 16, 2005, Rader sent in a purple floppy disk to KSAS-TV. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what a floppy disk is, it was just basically a tiny square disk used to save computer files. And along with it came a letter, a gold medallion necklace, and a photocopy of the cover of Rules of Prey, a 1989 serial killer novel. But Rader made one final mistake. Hidden inside a deleted Microsoft Word document on the floppy disk was metadata that he didn't know anyone could see. It contained the words Christ Lutheran Church and showed that the document had last been edited by Dennis, and a simple search revealed that Dennis Rader was the church council president. When investigators drove by his house, the black Jeep Cherokee was parked out front, and it wasn't enough to arrest him yet, but it was the kind of circumstantial evidence that would quickly lead investigators to the full picture. Police took the next step and obtained a warrant to test a pap smear from Rader's daughter that was collected at Kansas State University Medical Center. The DNA results were shocking. They showed a familial match to the DNA found under Vicki Wagerly's fingernails, meaning the killer was closely related to Rader's daughter. And combined with all the other evidence, it was enough for police to arrest Dennis Rader. And Dennis Rader was finally arrested on February 25th, 2005 in Park City, Kansas. Police had pieced together enough evidence from the floppy disk, surveillance footage, and that crucial DNA link to make their move. When they showed up at his house, Rader was just living his normal life, completely unaware that the web had closed in around him. Once he was in police custody, Dennis Rader was upset with the investigators, but not for the reason that you might think. He wasn't angry that he'd been arrested or finally caught. He was angry that the police had lied to him about whether a floppy disk could be traced. And honestly, that really shows you the mindset that he had. I mean, he was more concerned about being outsmarted than he was about being held accountable for what he'd done. And it really gives you a glimpse into how he viewed himself and his crimes. And it's just crazy to think that after all those years, it came down to something like that. And Rader didn't hold back. He confessed to all 10 BTK murders, walking authorities through each crime from the Otero family to Catherine Bright, Shirley Relfield, Maureen Hedge, Vicky Wagerly, and Nancy Fox. He explained his methods, his rituals, and even the trophies he had kept. Hearing him recount it all, it was impossible to not feel horrified and stunned at just how meticulously he had managed to evade capture for decades. Rader's trial was surprisingly quick. He pled guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. And you can tell by watching his TV court confession that he had no remorse at all. He spoke in like this very monotone, calm manner, and you can just tell that he is completely evil and an outright monster. For the victims' families and the Wichita community, it was a strange mix of relief and shock. Justice had been served, but the years of fear and the sheer scope of Rader's crimes left a permanent mark. And since his arrest in 2005, his daughter Carrie Ronson has faced challenges, but has worked tirelessly to reclaim her life and find peace. In her 2019 memoir, A Serial Killer's Daughter, she courageously shared the shock, trauma, and heartache of discovering her father's crimes while telling her journey toward healing and forgiveness. She has spoke openly about her experiences in the Netflix documentary My Father, the BTK Killer, and has become a compassionate advocate for families affected by violent crime. Now living in Michigan with her family and 2 children, Carrie has spent years in therapy confronting anxiety, PTSD, and the lasting impact of her father's actions. Through faith, storytelling, and public outreach, she has transformed her pain into a source of strength, offering hope and understanding to others while navigating the complex reality of being the child of a serial killer. And just like that, the story of BTK comes full circle. Dennis Rader, the seemingly ordinary husband, father, church leader, was finally unmasked as the monster who had terrorized Wichita for decades. The investigations, the letters, the taunts, they all led to the one person no one ever suspected. It's a case that reminds us how evil can hide in plain sight, how someone can live a normal life while committing unspeakable crimes. In the end, patience, persistence, and Dennis Rader's own ego and craving for recognition helped bring justice to the victims and their families. And with that, you guys, that is the BTK case. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to join me on this case. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Honestly, I'm just so glad that he's been caught, and he honestly deserves to rot for the rest of his life in prison. He's an absolute monster. And if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you go ahead and hit subscribe so that you don't miss future episodes. New episodes go live every week on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, with the video version going live on YouTube as well. So until next time, take care of yourself and stay safe. Bye, guys.